Destroying Angels. The Tower Jacks and the Wolves of War gather beneath the boughs of Longshire and Grey Charge. They are hosted by the chapters of Rykos, guests of the newly rebuilt chapter houses. Their leaders meet with the commanders of Remember Exile to coordinate their campaign against the eternal Lothair, whose garden occupies all of Tamabode. The Wolves of War are supported by more than 30 warbands belonging to independent captains, more than half of whom are highborn soldiers eager to remove Lothair from Rykos. Potent enchantment woven over the Wolves of War ensures that these disparate champions will work together effectively in the battles to come. They are also joined by a dozen League siege engineers, some seconded from Tower Jacks, but mostly hired from the University of Holberg for the mission into Tamabode. The Tower Jacks have brought with them numerous supplies for building siege engines, but they have not actually begun to construct them. Dragging towers, catapults and mangonels through the dense vegetation of Tamabode makes little sense, and for that matter, it would be dangerous to assume that Lothair's living stronghold would act the same as the redoubts of wood and stone they have encountered before. Tamabode, like Grey Charge and Longshire, is heavily forested, but there the similarities end. While most of the trees are notionally the same age as those in the rest of Rykos, restored by the spring magic unleashed across the territory to heal the scars left by the stone-toed orcs, those in Tamabode are significantly larger. Some are recognisable as oaks or sycamore, but others are entirely unfamiliar with strangely shaped leaves and peculiar fruit that no sensible citizen of the Empire considers eating, no matter how succulent it may appear. Everything is overgrown with a profusion of fungus, spreading ferns, hanging moss, spreading lichen, and less identifiable forms of life. Great mushrooms stand 2 or 3 times as tall as a human, with broad caps and oddly radiating flukes beneath. Some are flat like tables, others tall and fluted, still others almost spherical. They exist in a mad profusion of colours. The greenery of a healthy forest is overrun with rust red, amber yellow, vivid scarlet, pastel blue, bone white, coal black, and even stranger shades. The air itself is thick with the spores produced by the fungus and the ferns, although these spores seem not to press much beyond the edge of the region, as if turned back at the borders. The thick vegetation, for want of a better word, makes progress slow. The vanguard are forced as often as not to chop their way through tangled vines, briars, mushrooms, clinging creepers, sticky fronds, and more esoteric plant life to make even a little progress. The entire time they hack and slash, they're breathing in the spores of Lothair's garden. The first fatalities are those who experience a profound reaction to the spores. Rashes spread quickly across skin that becomes red and sensitive that it ruptures. Eyes swell closed, noses stream with thick mucus, and the victims are racked with hacking coughs as their bodies desperately try to clear airways, rapidly closing over. Only a comparative handful of humans experience reactions this severe, and the symptoms are quickly identified by doctors, but those who do suffer painful deaths, choking, clawing at their throats and faces, desperate to breathe. Everyone, without exception, is forced to cover their nose and mouth with thick cloths, and keep them moist. Water supplies dwindle quickly. Even those who do not suffer a fatal reaction to the air find it difficult to breathe for long periods of time. In some places, the spores and tiny seeds are thick enough to obscure sight. Only those briars in the Imperial armies are able to move through Lothair's garden without difficulty. Nobody touched by the magic of spring experiences a negative reaction to the air. This causes some of their companions to eye them suspiciously, and there are whispers about briar soldiers. It does not help that some of them report hearing odd noises that seem inaudible to their companions, whispering voices, indescribable music, and in some cases a low and insistent call to abandon their comrades and simply explore the wonders of Lothair's garden. It's impossible to say if this is some malign influence, or simply a side effect of being in a place so profoundly imbued with spring magic. The garden is even stranger at night. A great many of the fungi that grow throughout the forest in the dark, in a profusion of different shades. Most provide a low, steady effulgence. At night, the more sensitive among the soldiers experience peculiar dreams full of surreal and disturbing imagery that they cannot quite put into words when they awaken, but which leave them pale and withdrawn for hours after they rise. Worse than all of this is that any wound suffered in Lothair's garden is an invitation for something to take root. The Towerjacks in particular are familiar with the malign spring curses favoured by the Druge that taint the water and spread sickness and disease, but they are a pale shadow of the rot that spreads through Lothair's garden. Any break in the skin is enough. Unless it is immediately tended to, the wound becomes packed with spores and parasitic growth that spreads quickly through the body with fatal consequences. Physics and magician healers are taxed to the point of exhaustion, dealing with the repercussions of even the easiest engagement in the approach to the castle at the heart of Tamabode. There have been visitors to Tamabode since Lothair took residence before. They have spoken of dangerous vegetation, but it seems that in the months since Lothair closed the borders, it has bred or unleashed entirely new threats. For example, some of the plants secrete juices that sear flesh like acid. The worst are perhaps the delicate fronds of a certain pale and rugose thing that combines elements of fern and anemone. The tendrils drift and sway with the slightest breeze, but when they touch living flesh, they wrap around it, the burning caustic sap eating away at exposed skin, wool, cotton, and leather down to the bone. The only answer to this particular danger is heavy iron gauntlets, to tear the frond away and hope that it does not take great swathes of the victim's skin with it. Then fire can be brought to bear. But here, as with many of the other threats of Tamabode, fire is a two-edged sword. While the bone-white anemone burns easily enough, the smoke it gives off burns the throat, eyes and lungs as easily as the vitriolic fronds burn the flesh. The acid anemone is only one example of the dangers of Lothair's garden, and while many of the threats are sessile plants that can be avoided, there are terrible creatures in Tamabode that actively hunt soldiers. Some of the first encountered are ambulatory mushrooms, perhaps even heralds of Lothair, that seem to cluster together. The first kind are rose-pink puffballs, about the size of a large dog, with tiny stumpy legs that react strongly to movement. Approaching or passing by one of these creatures causes it to begin a terrible howling wail, quite out of proportion with its size. It alerts everything within half a mile to the location of the intruders. Worse, the creature releases puffs of spores that make it impossible to concentrate. This would be bad enough, but their howling dirge invariably attracts a species of taller mushroom creature with a distinctive bluish cast. Much more swift in their movements, they flail around themselves with agonizing whip-like fronds that carry a supernatural disease which causes flesh to rot and slough off. Unable to penetrate metal armor, they are nonetheless seeming adept at striking the least defended parts of the victim, at the joints and areas of exposed padding. Leather and wool are no protection from their touch, allowing them to cripple limbs and in some cases, especially when facing magicians or skirmishers, cause fatal injuries that leave the victim unable to do anything but scream as the Azure Guardians rip them apart with their whipping limbs. Heralds of Lothair are encountered in abundance, of course, but they are not the pleasant little toadstool imps, or even the shambling humanoid courtiers that have been seen before by imperial magicians. Instead, they are replaced with horrific amalgams of plant and animal matter, often held within thick shells of hard-spined wood. They fight with terrible tearing claws, emerging without warning from the dense undergrowth to assail interlopers with little care for their own safety. They come from nowhere, attack, and then melt back into the garden. But dangerous as they are the least of the Eternal's children. Much more deadly are the great beasts, larger than oxen, that erupt from the toxic jungle, slaughtering everyone that comes within reach. Awful as the larger creatures are, it is a certain species of smaller beast that the League soldiers particularly come to loathe. Barely larger than a sheep, these hunched horrors scuttle towards intruders with gleeful disregard for danger, flailing delicate feathered antennae whose touch causes dead organic material to rot and makes metal rust and fall apart. They target the weapons of their opponents, quickly moving on when their prey is defenceless, leaving them at the mercy of the deadly inhabitants of Lothair's garden. While mending spells and artisan's oil can reverse the devastatingly gentle touches of these scuttling creatures, doing so strains the resources of the imperial forces, and the creatures must be kept away from the raw materials carried by the League siege engineers at all costs. Eventually, however, the two League armies make it to the heart of Tamabode. to the centre of Lothair's garden, to the castle of ruin. It lies a short distance from the feet of the great sign of Tamar, and according to the high-born guardians who fight alongside the League armies, it surrounds a potent spring regio, once claimed by the old Druge warlock Green Mask. The horrors of the preceding weeks have gone some way towards preparing the imperial forces for the castle, but it is still difficult to truly comprehend its size and strangeness. Rather than being made of cold stone or dead wood, the castle of ruin is composed entirely of living fungus. There are no hard edges or sharp corners, the entire thing disturbingly organic. It is something that has grown, not something that has been built. Great fluting towers reach several hundred feet into the sky, piercing heavy clouds composed entirely of fungal spores that drift and churn above the castle, moving on in incomprehensible currents. The siege engineers accompanying the League armies set to work to build ladders, towers, rams, and other devices of their trade, so that they may storm the walls. At once they discover that they are in a race against time. The garden of Lothair, particularly this close to the castle of ruin, is actively hostile to their construction work. They must work in shifts to complete their endeavour, or see their engines fall apart under the corrosive touch of spring magic before they are even completed. They are the equal of the task, however, and within a week armoured towers rise above the fungal forest. Even as the mould and rust takes hold, catapults launch great rocks and barrels of burning pitch against the walls of the castle of ruin. 2 great rams are positioned to attack weak points in the walls, for there seem to be no actual gates into the castle that anyone can identify. The League and highborn soldiers split into groups, each one charging with capturing or destroying a key part of the castle, and the assault begins. The fighting is chaotic, confused, verging on madness. Parts of the castle separate from the walls or floors, becoming mobile creatures in their own right, launching unexpected ambushes against the weakest parts of the attacking forces. The size and scope of the fortification alone would make capturing it a daunting prospect. Yet it seems that not only is the castle a living thing, it is one that is capable of some level of thought and even limited movement. Where a mundane castle might be protected by siege weapons or ballistae, the castle of ruin grows poison fronds that whip and tear at any who get too close, or explosive puffballs that spew deadly spores at those who accidentally encounter them. And of course, now the Empire has reached its prize, it seems like every single beast at Lothair's disposal is drawn towards them to protect the heart of the Rot Lord's realm. Yet for all its savagery, the castle of ruin cannot hold against the ingenuity of the League and the tenacity of the highborn. Inch by inch they press forward, burning and shattering area after area, penetrating the rings of defence until the heart of the castle is laid bare. At its very centre, within a great tumble-down keep of pulsing, luminescent mushrooms and vines, is a single immense mushroom. Atop a 20-foot stalk so wide it would take 3 people to circle it, spreads a snow-white cap with a soft pink underside. Long curling tendrils descend from the cap, twitching and writhing as the Imperial soldiers cautiously approach. It glows with a pale luminescence that proves dangerous to look upon. Those who stare at the mushroom for too long become entranced, then enervated, then incapable of doing anything save sitting or lying down and waiting for death to claim them, at least until they are removed from the area. The magicians who have made it this far confirm that the mushroom encompasses the heart of the Spring Regio, or perhaps that it is the Spring Regio in some strange fashion. There is hurried discussion. While battle still rages in other parts of the castle, the last 3 barrels of pitch are brought to bear, and on the signal, hurled against the mushroom and ignited. Fire immediately roars up the trunk, immolating the thing, which begins to give off an unholy high-pitched shrieking as it flails its tendrils, which serve to spread the fire even wider. There is a terrible feeling of pressure and a moment of indescribable stillness, and then the castle of ruin begins to collapse. No, collapse is too soft a word for it. The castle begins to dissolve, falling in on itself, breaking apart, exploding into motes, drifting light and clouds of spores. What begins is an orderly retreat soon becomes a rout as the castle of ruin tears itself apart. At the same time, the humans are running away from the heart of the castle. The heralds and beasts of Lothair are running towards it as if drawn by some clarion call only they can hear. They ignore the mortals, save for a few unlucky individuals who are too slow to get out of the way of a trampling behemoth. Outside the walls, that same dissolution is spreading. Everything is falling apart, dissolving into choking clouds of pink and white and grey, swirling up into the sky. The good news is that despite the destruction, it proves significantly easier to move away from the ruined castle than it was to approach it. The leading edge of the dissolution rapidly outpaces the retreating troops, yet some of the highborn begin to panic. What if this great storm of dissolution spreads across Rykos? Is Lothair planning to undo the restoration work that removed the taint of the Druge from their home? Is it planning to unleash some horrific curse against the highborn people, against their unsuspecting country folk? Almost precisely an hour after the heart of the castle ruin was set aflame, there is another moment of stillness. An immense, great, lazy, spinning cloud hangs over the place where the castle once stood. It's as if the whole world is holding its breath. And then a moment later, the spores funnel downwards towards the heart of what was once Lothair's garden, and in less than 10 minutes, they're gone, all of them. A moment after that, it begins to rain. Pure, cold water that washes away the last lingering vestiges of Lothair's presence. Over the next few weeks, the unconquered of Remember Exile and the League scouts explore Tamabode. There is almost no sign that Lothair was ever here, beyond a slightly higher number of mushrooms and toadstools. There are still trees, and many of them are still bearded with moss and lichen, but while they are larger and more ancient-looking than they have any right to be, they seem to be natural trees nonetheless. Birdsong is heard in Tamabode for the first time in several years, and animals begin to migrate into Tamabode from neighbouring regions. Not everything is the same. The sign of Tamar is still present, albeit heavily overgrown with undergrowth and new trees. If nature is left to take its course, the earthwork will effectively be destroyed by the plants that have taken root on it. Yet the powerful spring regio that served as the heart of Lothair's castle of ruin, there is no sign. Magicians pore over the place where it once stood, which is now simply a nondescript glade of trees, without the slightest hint of any magic. Whatever powerful magical sight was once there, that first drew a crazed Druge Galahad and later an Eternal, is gone for good. It is not the only magical sight that appears to have been consumed in some fashion. Tamar's toes is likewise no more, and over the next several weeks it becomes clear that there are no mana sites anywhere in Tamabode. The flows of mana have been significantly disrupted by the destruction of the Garden of Lothair, it seems, but even that chaos is beginning to settle down again. The magicians who explore the new woodlands tentatively suggest that new mana sites will form soon enough. It could have been very different. There is speculation about why Lothair did not strike out at Rykos once it was clear its garden was going to be destroyed. Perhaps it was unable to do so, thanks to the enmity of the Imperial Conclave. Or perhaps it simply chose not to. The choices of Eternals are often inscrutable to mortals. All in all, it is as if Lothair was never here, as if the presence was just a dream from which the people of Rykos are now awakening. Game information. Rykos. The region of Tamabode has been liberated by Imperial troops and is now part of the Empire again. A major contributing factor to the victory here was the presence of Remember Exile. The fortification in Broken Ride, without the aid of the highborn garrison in fighting through Lothair's garden, the League armies would still be engaged in the conquest of Tamabode. All sign of the eternal Lothair, its garden, and its fortification have gone. The region now has the forested and spring-touched qualities. The unique spring regio that once stood near the sign of Tamar is gone, and the mana site known as Tamar's Toes has been destroyed. The earthworks, known as the sign of Tamar, is slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Without intervention from human hands, it will effectively have been erased from the start of the winter solstice. Participation. Rykos. Any character whose military unit was assigned to support one of the two League armies or the fortification of Remember Exile will be experiencing the lingering effects of exposure to the Garden of Lofir. There will be a slip in your pack which will detail the effect. As part of the lingering effects, you may wish to Refizrep a tainted wound, an injury that has been touched by spring magic, such as a patch of moss growing on your arm or an eye that has been damaged in some way by exposure to the garden. If you are a human whose military unit was assigned to support one of the 2 League armies or the fortification of Remember Exile, you may choose to roleplay have suffered a severe life-threatening injury which was healed with ritual magic, but left you with the touch of the Briar lineage. If you wish to take this option, you should email admin@profouneddecisions.co.uk with your character ID so that we can update your character. You may not take this option if you already possess a different lineage. It's only available to pure humans. If you're already a Briar, you may choose to strengthen your lineage by increasing your physical trappings due to exposure to the garden. The generals of the Towerjacks and the generals of the Wolves of War may choose to take advantage of either of these opportunities if they wish to be under the lingering effects of the garden. They should email plot@profouneddecisions.co.uk to let us know. As always, these opportunities are only available to players who meet the criteria. Please do not email in to ask if you can have the effect on your military unit, as it was not actively involved in Tamabode this downtime.